Cheap Tickets wants to thank you for defending our country all over the world. Cheap Tickets wants to help you take a trip of your own. We believe the best trips in life are cheap. And as a proud supporter of the U.S. military, they want to offer you flights, hotels, car rentals, and even event tickets for less because you deserve it. Visit cheaptickets.com/military and take 18% off hotels. Offer is valid for active duty service members, veterans, military reserves, and the National Guard. Cheap Tickets thanks you for your service. cheaptickets.com/military. Now more than ever, you need reliable news you can count on. Since 1861, Stars and Stripes has been committed to bringing you the news without the spin. We believe in the First Amendment, and we're damn proud to have been there alongside you wherever you were deployed, keeping you connected. Today, we're only a click away. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast, and get 50% off your subscription. 50% off. There are some folks out there that think Stars and Stripes is a little old-fashioned. Well, folks, maybe right now, we need a little old-fashioned. Go to stripes.com and get reconnected with a legacy of news without the spin. Stripes.com. And welcome to Military Matters. This is a fast take where we talk about the last episode we did and answer some of your questions, comments, and emails. I'm Rod Rodriguez. To help me along with this episode, I brought back to the show former Ranger and Green Beret turned author and investigative journalist, Jack Murphy. We talked about some of the feedback we received from you all, and also about recent news of a plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. If you're interested in hearing the whole unedited interview I had with Jack Murphy, go to stripes.com. The video will be right there with this podcast. So let's kick this off with a quick intro from Jack Murphy.
My name's Jack Murphy. I am an investigative journalist. I previously served in Army Special Operations for 8 years. Wrote a whole book about it called Murphy's Law that you can check out if you're interested. I've reported from Syria, Iraq, the Philippines, and elsewhere, and I report primarily about military affairs.
As I mentioned in the QAnon episode, Jack Murphy's article for Connecting Vets about QAnon and the Special Operations Forces, or SOF community, is what inspired me to research the topic of QAnon in the military. I wanted to know what inspired him to approach the topic of QAnon and SOF.
Well, I think what I found most disturbing was how many special operations veterans I saw falling into QAnon. In particular, somebody who I was close to, my team sergeant in Special Forces was one of them who went all the way down that rabbit hole. And it's very concerning. And to speak personally to it, it also undermines your sense of who you are as a man, because it's sort of like, you know, if Batman is crazy, then Robin starts questioning who he is because so much of his identity is invested in that. So in this case, we're talking about my senior, my leader, my superior in Special Forces, somebody who I admired. He went down this rabbit hole. So now I, Jack Murphy, have to ask, well, what does that make me? Who am I? You know? So I think, it undermines your sense of reality when that happens.
One of the comments we received about our QAnon episode was that our listeners didn't feel like our guests, Travis View and Jack Murphy, understood Q's writings, that they hadn't read them all. And if they had, they would understand that Q doesn't call for violence. Some even argued that our guests weren't qualified to comment on QAnon. Let me just say that Travis View is extremely familiar with the QAnon theory, and that his podcast QAnon Anonymous is a remarkable resource to learn more about the QAnon conspiracy theory or belief, whatever you want to call it. He's also written extensively on the subject for The Washington Post. As for Jack?
Well, I have read some of the Q posts, although I'll readily admit I have not read all of them. I do not follow it religiously. I've read enough that I see a complete lack of any factual basis in what's being posted. What I see posted is sort of a form of hypnotism, very broad statements that allow the reader to project whatever they like into it. And that's part of the fun and the allure of QAnon for the people who follow it, is that they follow the breadcrumbs that they call it. They're baking the loaves. So they're taking these breadcrumbs that Q posts and then, trying to work out the puzzle in their own mind. It's a sort of participatory sort of thing. It's not like a traditional cult where you're just there in receive mode. So that's my perception of that. I think to say it's nonviolent at this moment, that's largely accurate, although there have been a couple murders associated with QAnon people. Largely, the movement itself has not been violent thus far. They're not out in the streets killing people, and probably most of them don't want to do that. However, they are espousing an ideology, a belief system that says there's a fifth column in the United States government, that there are these deep state cannibalistic pedophiles who are ritualistically abusing children and doing all these nefarious things. And they are looking forward to a moment that they call the storm, that the storm is coming, that all of these bad people are going to be rounded up, nominally arrested and imprisoned, maybe executed. We don't really know. So to say that there's no violent aspect of QAnon is really not accurate. There's this messianic fervor around QAnon that's very disturbing. My concern, I guess you could say, is that yes, while they're not out in the streets killing people right now, I acknowledge that, is that at some point, people who truly believe this conspiracy theory might get tired of waiting for the storm. What happens when the storm doesn't come? And if you legitimately believe that there are cannibals and pedophiles running our government, why would you not pick up a gun and start shooting these people, or that you suspect, right? Why would you not do that? So this is the concern, is what is the next step? Where's this going to go from here?
Just a few days after our QAnon episode premiered, a story broke about a foiled plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, involving a militia group and 2 former Marines. Now, as of this recording, there is zero evidence to link the militia group in question or the accused Marines to QAnon. In fact, some early reports have them possibly linked to the Boogaloo Boys, which is a completely different thing and different set of ideology we're not going to get into right now. But this plot to kidnap a governor involving veterans kind of supports my notion that we're a vulnerable group to extremists of any leaning.
Yeah, well, yeah. Again, it's an incredibly complex issue, and there's all sorts of different extremists. And I believe it was the director of the FBI recently said that it's the right-wing elements, the extremist right-wing elements, who are the most dangerous, which I think is accurate at this moment. However, there are also a lot of fly-by-night experts out there, people who should know better or should be credible, but they put out all kinds of false information about essentially exaggerating a lot of these threats. As far as why it's a national security threat, I mean, in this case, we are talking about a fifth column, a deviant fifth column inside the chain of command, be they QAnon, neo-Nazis, communists. There are these people out there that we've seen in recent years who have a deviant ideology, a deviant agenda that is not in any way congruent with American values or the American government. And when you have those people who have infiltrated into the special operations community, who could potentially be in charge of our nuclear security, other very important critical positions in the U.S. military, that's absolutely a national security threat. Or in the conventional military, everyday infantrymen, for example, learning the skills to conduct small unit tactics, and then getting recruited into an extremist organization and bringing that training to them. There's definitely a threat there that this military training ingratiates itself into these networks. And I even spoke to a woman who she's a former neo-Nazi. She has gave all that up a long time ago. She's no longer interested in any of that nonsense. I talked to her on the phone, and she told me that she grew up in a military community, and she was involved in the movement since about the age of 16. And there were always military people involved in it. And she said, what's especially concerning is that you have let's say a basic training platoon, a bunch of young men who are away from home for the first time. And she said, if you have just one guy in that basic training platoon who is a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist, and they're just a little bit charismatic, it's a fertile ground to recruit new members into the movement.
I want to make it clear that I am not saying QAnon is racially motivated. What I will say is that racists have a way of hijacking just about any cause, movement, or ideology. Another aspect of racism is, like Jack said, it has a virulence to it. It's infectious. And as it spreads, it picks and chooses what it wants from any belief system to reinforce itself. So it's not surprising to me to see cross-sections of QAnon and racists creating vocal groups. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the nitty-gritty details folks pointed out to me about what they thought we got wrong about QAnon. I would if there was a fact we got wrong. But when it comes to Q and QAnon, there's really no concrete facts. Everything is symbolic or hidden, and it's all up to interpretation. But what I walked away with from our last episode was a question. What is it about veterans and service members that makes them so vulnerable to extremism? And I'm not talking about violent extremism per se. I'm talking about political extremes, ideological extremes, the foundation for violent extremism. Jack Murphy has a theory that joining the military is kind of like entering another world, and that the person you were when you joined kind of goes into a state of dormancy.
And I think that happens to all of us, that our minds are loaded into a sort of time capsule. We're put in a hypersleep. We're in stasis for however long we're in the military. And then when we get out, we can't relate to people. We don't understand people. It's like, you've just arrived on this alien planet and you don't know what to do or how you fit into, the fabric of society. What it is that we're bringing the global war on terror home to the United States so that we as veterans can maintain our relevancy, because we do not have that any relevancy. We have that failure to adapt, that failure to transition into regular life and find something else that we can do, some other way that we can contribute to society. So our only relevance is as the guy with a gun.
So I have this theory that I've shopped around for a couple of years now. My theory is based on a fear that the pendulum will swing the other way in regards to our country's adoration and respect for veterans. That enough negativity and bad press can change us from assets to liabilities. I know this is a dark and gloomy theory, but it's one that worries me. Some vets feel there's already a stigma associated with being a veteran. The stigma that we're damaged, we all have PTSD, and we're all on psych drugs. I don't think that stigma is very widespread, or at least folks for the most part don't buy into it. But recruiting vets and service members into extremist organizations is a good way for the military community as a whole to gain unwanted reputations and stigmas.
Long story short, yeah, I think so. In poll after poll, Americans, love the military, they love veterans, and I don't think that's going to change necessarily anytime soon. But what we're seeing is a persistent politicization of veterans, and veterans themselves politicizing themselves, using that as political platforms to run on, or using it to advance some other social or political agenda. They use their veteran status as their credibility to advance some sort of political agenda or social agenda. And some of those agendas are nonviolent, and it's that person's right to express themselves politically in that way. Others are a bit more nefarious. People who belong to militia movements, neo-Nazi movements, could be even far leftist movements. And I think that, it's the public could come to see us in a different light. And if I'm correct in that there is going to be an increase in political violence, veterans expressing political violence on the streets of America, and I shudder to think of how bad that could get. But if we do go down that road, yes, I think the public will come to see us in a very different light.
The point of our QAnon episode wasn't to discuss the validity of the QAnon theory, but to discuss its effect on veterans and service members. I want to make it clear, belief or consideration in QAnon doesn't make you a bad person, a stupid person, or anything like that. I draw the line at violence. That's it. I worry that groups interested in violence are going to see our military community as a resource instead of a deterrent. We already have enough to worry about: service members disappearing and dying on military bases, COVID-19, and suicide rates. And like Jack mentioned, the politicization of our military by both sides of the aisle has created tension in the ranks that shouldn't be there. Now, I'm not claiming to have the inside track on anything, and I'm not going to say that conspiracies don't happen. I will say, without a doubt, that our military community, to include veterans, service members, and their families, are a fierce, talented, and resourceful bunch of people that will do anything to protect the freedoms we all enjoy. With that said, no matter what you believe or think, there's one way that I know of that you can make a difference in your world, in your life, and in mine. Vote. Make sure you've registered and actually get out there and vote. I'm not endorsing anyone. Get educated on the issues that matter to you and make a decision about to whom you'll cast your ballot for. That's it. Folks, subscribe to Stars and Stripes. Use promo code podcast. Get 50% off your digital subscription. That's 50% off your digital subscription. And as always, Military Matters is free to subscribe to, available wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And it's also available to download and stream from stripes.com. I'm Rod Rodriguez. I'll see you at the next episode.